It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you very much to Jörg and Luca for having me. And I think actually Elena just set the scene perfectly for this contribution now. So how do we operationalize AI governance at Zurich Insurance Group? Let me get this working.
You have to point to the laptop.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so a brief overview of the agenda that I like to cover. So first of all, very briefly, in the interest of time, just to show that actually AI and also generative AI in insurance does play a role already today. Then looking at the risks arising from both traditional and generative AI. I'd like then to build on what also has been covered partially in the standard setting session and also by Elena. A quick update on AI policy and regulation from an international perspective. And then our own approach on AI governance, plus how we actually think about this in terms of platforms and tools. So very briefly, as part of our AI governance efforts, we are tracking our use cases. We have set up a global AI inventory. This is just a selection of some use cases that we have, and you probably can see some of those actually involve generative AI. For example, Zurich Chat for employees. This is our own internal, the safe Zurich secluded ChatGPT for our employees that we have tailored or are still tailoring to our needs. You can probably see from the titles of those use cases that we pursue a very diligent approach to AI. So our AI assurance framework, as we call it internally, is based on a risk-based approach. So we don't take any risks that we don't understand, and we govern our use cases very profoundly, very thoroughly. Speaking of Gen AI, because we are still in the hype phase, I just mentioned Zurich Chat. Then we do have two, actually, they may not sound very fancy, but they are highly efficient use cases because they support operational efficiency. So just to mention policy IQ, what you see in the middle. So actually underwriters these days have to go through huge volumes of documentation, underwriting guidelines to find precisely the section, the paragraph that is solving the issue they are trying to solve. This is taking a lot of time, even for experts. And it's an LLM-based solution that actually within seconds extracts the right passage, the right paragraph that the underwriter is looking for. And with that, you can really benefit from huge operational efficiency gains. Importantly, there is no risk involved. It's generative AI, but there is no risk in terms of discrimination and what we understand from a responsible AI perspective. So this is Zurich Chat, our own tool that we designed internally. We are very proud of that. It's being optimized on a continuous basis. As you can see, some numbers at the bottom. We have currently 30 business units onboarded. We have 12,000 users that are logged in. 8,000 users have returned. So the numbers are improving over time. And importantly, we do prohibit as an organization the use of the public OpenAI ChatGPT tool. Just to set the scene in terms of what we do, now, what are the risks arising from AI and generative AI in particular? A brief overview, because we think that that is actually the basis, the foundation for every AI governance framework. I'm not sure actually whether it's correct to speak of risks. It's being called risk triggers on this slide. So first of all, we have the model-related risks, performance, accuracy, and hallucination. It's often being referred to as a new risk in the Gen AI context. You could also think of it as a model error, just a new type of model error, just to simplify things, explainability, bias, robustness, and so forth. Then human agency, very important here from my perspective, transparency and accountability. The famous human in the loop principle, this kicks in at that level. Then foundation models, this can be considered as a new risk trigger, because what is excuse me, really being amplified here is the model provider dependency. We don't have the necessary transparency how the model has been trained. We know that from the traditional foundation models, pretty much all the data available on the internet has been used. This is not precisely helpful when it comes to governance. Then we have, of course, the product and algorithmic liability topic, highly complex, also from a legal perspective. And then, in particular, last year, I think now the discussions have became a little bit less, or the noise has gone to a certain extent. Without the legal problems, actually, our challenges even being resolved. So last year, you may remember, ChatGPT has been banned in Italy by the regulator for some time because there was uncertainty as to how the illegal training of the model should be dealt with. How this, I don't know, how the future would look like. Every model at the time, every foundation model has been trained on the same basis. So basically, you had the policy choice whether you would forbid everything or whether you just accept this violation of privacy laws. So in the meantime, we have moved on, and we have now the EU AI Act. We have a clarification how important the adherence to data governance and data protection laws is in the context of model training. So going forward, we would probably have more comfort that all of this is happening in a legal way. So those are the risk triggers. Then what is resulting from such risk triggers, if they materialize, is the reputational risk that is particularly relevant, I think, for a company that is not selling any tangible goods that speak for themselves, but for companies like financial services that are dealing with trust, customer trust. Financial risk has been mentioned before. Now thinking of the EU AI Act, where the maximum fine can actually amount to up to 7% of the global annual turnover. This is significant. It is not maybe being mentioned that often, but potentially this can be combined with a fine under the GDPR, which amounts to, or can amount up to 4% of the annual turnover. So you could end up in the ideal case with a fine of up to 11% of your global annual turnover, which is even more significant. And as we know, all these AI scandals that have made the news in the last years, they were often a combination of privacy infringements. Right, the regulatory risk is a topic per se. And as we know, we have now the EU AI Act, but AI regulation keeps emerging. This is by no means complete, just an overview of what is happening, and the color code is indicative of the different states of the regulations. So some are effective already, others are about to become effective soon. Sometimes the quality is deliberately guidance only, or we have also a great deal of principles and white papers where the regulators are not yet decided where to go, whether they want to shoot for binding legislation or rather pursue a soft law approach. This slide is actually picking up on a concern that has been raised earlier today. This famous quote, the European Union regulates, Silicon Valley innovates. I have to say, I do not quite agree with that, because on the one hand, we have this EU AI Act that is in many dimensions comparable to the GDPR, the European Data Protection Regulation, that has also, like the EU AI Act, an extraterritorial effect, meaning it is globally relevant, not only within EU territory. You may have heard of the spillover effect of the GDPR. In fact, looking back, the GDPR has served as a role model and has been impacting the data privacy laws and regulations of many, many countries. So it's by no means an EU-confined regulation. That is important to note. Also, if we look at the key principles that we hear in the responsible or ethical AI discussion, you really, almost in every country, in every region, you hear about transparency. You hear about explainability. All the AI systems in every country, they should be robust. security and safety are key. It's about human-centric AI. It's about fairness, non-discrimination. There are subtle oversight and accountability. So those principles are the common denominator in the global ethical AI or responsible AI discussion. And if we look at the different regulatory efforts in different regions of the world, actually, we do find a great degree of convergence. And that is, I think, a good sign. It is also reflected in the standard setting process, right? Which is very internationally driven. And there are subtle differences, of course. So in China, for example, there is a special focus on transparency and oversight. China has been leading the way in terms of regulating the generative AI developments. In the US and Anglo-Saxon countries, there is historically a focus on fairness and non-discrimination. In the headings, you often see safety and security first. But if you actually look into the regulation or also the Biden executive order, there is a great focus on the fairness principle as well. So it is sometimes really necessary to take a second look and read through the documents, and then you can really see the convergence, and that it is really the world working towards this common objective. It is not that different parts of the world are trying something very different in the responsible AI space. Today, we cannot not talk about the EU AI Act. So that is why a very brief overview here makes probably sense. You see that some use cases are prohibited because risk is deemed to be unacceptable. And actually, it is not so unacceptable and prohibited. This is a very strong term. But if you look at social scoring, just to give you a bit of background in the earlier discussions, it's now a bit clearer in the final text of the EU AI Act. But before long, still towards the end of the year, it was not really clear to what extent pricing assessments could be considered social scoring, because the definition was just so broad. And that was one of the many challenges that the EU Commission was facing with this horizontal regulation, because if you try to define something, you try to make sure it's comprehensive, that nothing falls between the cracks. You're oftentimes capturing areas that should actually not be captured. So there is a lot of policy discourse happening, and there is still a lot of clarification needed. But what is still, and I think Elena mentioned that before, what is still among the prohibited use cases, and this is something that needs to be decommissioned in the next 6 months, so it's not 2026 plus, it is now, is real-time emotion recognition in the workplace. So this is important for every HR function to make sure that this is not being deployed, ideally across the world and not only for the EU operations. Right, I think we covered high risk before. Pricing is a very sensitive area. Life and health. Why is it life and health and, for example, not retail? I think it's important to shed some light on that. So the reason why this has been considered high risk in Annex 3 of the regulation is that this, in some jurisdictions, can be existential for human beings. If you're not getting life insurance coverage or health insurance coverage, your life can be at risk. This is not the case if you don't get, or if the quote for your car insurance is too high and unfair. But life and health can sometimes be, depending on the social system, be existential. This is an overview of what is actually required under the EU AI Act for high-risk AI systems. On the left-hand side, you see the governance requirements, basically reflecting the regulation, and then the 4 steps actually that a company would need to undertake in order to comply. Step 3 is a new challenge, because this new EU AI office that will receive all the registrations of these high-risk use cases, it still needs to be set up, and the details of the reporting still need to be finalized. This is something that every organization needs to set up internally, this external reporting, which also will be an operational challenge, most likely. But then the step 4 is the relief. Then you can go live with a system. You will, once you have completed the conformity assessment, you will receive the CE marking and the system can be deployed. But of course, if material changes happen in the AI system lifecycle, this needs to be revisited. Just a quick overview of the record finds that the EU AI actors were seeing. And now I'd like to turn to the approach on AI governance that we are pursuing. So actually, and this is probably the only point where I do disagree with Elena, we have been working on AI governance way before this regulation entered into force. We actually started our AI governance journey in 2019 when we launched our data commitment. It's an external promise to our customers and all external stakeholders that we treat customer data responsibly across various dimensions, including the use of AI and analytics. And based on this external promise, we have developed our own AI governance framework, AI assurance framework, as we call it, building on the principles that are globally consented with a focus on transparency, fairness, and accountability. And the fourth bullet here shows that we have developed, in particular, 2 tools to operationalize this, because we are now growing in terms of AI expertise, and we are deploying more and more systems. You can't do this process manually anymore. It's just scaling up. So AI governance has to scale as well. You need tools. So we have defined an AI risk and impact assessment for every AI use case. So whether it is an externally acquired or jointly developed or solely in-house developed tool, everything will need to be assessed across different risk and impact factors. Then, based on such risk and impact assessment, the use case gets a risk score, and this is either low, medium, or high. And this risk score then informs the governance the risk the AI use case has to undergo. This started off in a simple Excel. It's now in a tool, in a platform. We'll come to that in a moment. And so again, based on this risk and impact assessment score, a governance assessment needs to be completed. This is being complemented by a registration requirement in our global AI inventory. So we can only govern if we know what we have, meaning all our use cases, the external ones and the internal ones, all the tools that we're using need to be documented in this global AI inventory. This is actually showing the process flow that I just mentioned. Step 1 is the registration and the global AI inventory. Then the risk and impact assessment determines the risk score. Our governance pursues a risk-based approach, meaning that not every harmless chatbot that is, not using an LLM in the background and is simply providing questions to answers in a predefined way. Such simple chatbot would not have to go through the fully fledged governance assessment, because this would be considered low risk. Then the governance can be very light touch. However, if a system qualifies as high or medium risk, the complete governance assessment needs to be performed and evidence would need to be uploaded to the system. So in this case, we have used the platform OneTrust, because this is something that we're using for data protection and impact assessments anyhow, and we are linking the two. So if a use case is involving personal data, then we can leverage the information from data protection and impact assessment for our AI governance assessment. This is a synergy that we have been using for quite a while now. There are a few cases where, and I think this area will grow over time, where there are ethical concerns, and those can be material in a way that they touch upon a company's reputation and also strategic considerations. And then we do involve an AI screening forum. So importantly, just as an example, we don't do this, but there is a new AI tool that can, by analyzing your voice, can tell you whether or not you are a diabetes patient within seconds and with a very high precision. So this, for example, would be something that would go through such an AI screening forum, because this is a very sensitive area for an insurance company to use. So with our AI screening forum in other companies, you may have heard of that as AI ethics board or so. We are actually convening a very holistic group of stakeholders, looking at those use cases from different perspectives to make sure no relevant considerations, risk management or governance, fall between the cracks. Right, and actually, the output of this forum is a recommendation whether additional risk mitigation actions would be needed or whether the use case is good to go. But it is being documented along the lines or along the dimensions of fairness, transparency, and accountability, whether this use case is actually compliant with our own governance standards, with our own governance framework. Okay, now, so that was the way it actually works in terms of content. A few words on the operationalization. On the bottom, you see basically the three tools that I mentioned before. Actually, I think I did not mention the Gen AI Lounge at the very right-hand side. But let me start with the global AI inventory. It's Power BI based. We have I think it went live in 2022. It is showing all the use cases. You can filter along different categories. You can extract trends. It's showing along the lines of business, along the BUs where we're working in, what we do in terms of AI. It also deploys displays the risk score so that we have full visibility from a group perspective what we are doing in terms of AI. This is being connected to the OneTrust platform, where our risk and impact assessment and the governance assessment, two different assessments, are being performed. It's integrated from a data perspective, and we are currently working on the integration with other tools like our global application inventory, for example, to further enrich the data and make it more valuable. On the right-hand side, you see our generative AI lounge. It's another internally designed tool. It is a centralized facility where the use of all our LLM operations, all our Gen AI operations go through so that we have full visibility as to how our global organization is using generative AI. That ensures that only approved models, approved foundation models, will be used across our global organization. And all the experimentation and use case development that is happening in this lounge is again connected to our AI governance framework to make sure nothing falls between the cracks. Speaking of platforms. Platform is a very important word. So those are the components, the sub-platforms, so to speak, that I just showed before. We are now expanding, further refining our internal governance framework with generative AI governance dimension, which is still work in progress as the technology is evolving so quickly. We have now built the Responsible AI platform as a bigger, comprehensive platform containing the core elements that you see in the box at the bottom. AI Trust being basically our AI assurance framework with the two assessments that I showed before. AI diagnostics and monitoring is a tool that we have acquired that we are currently integrating to help us with bias elimination in particular. And what is important for us as a global organization, we are active in more than 200 countries around the world. As you can imagine, if responsible AI is a lot about fairness, fairness is being perceived very differently from country to country. but still as an organization, we have taken the executive decision that we want to pursue a globally consistent approach to AI governance. Mm-hmm. And that means we have to have, in terms of tooling, we have to have consistency as well. It is not the idea that every BU is thinking in their own way about fairness, transparency, explainability, and the like. That is the current attempt of spreading this this tool and integrating this into our framework to ensure the consistent interpretation of those AI governance or responsible AI principles. I mentioned the global AI inventory. We are providing for LLM content filtering and are currently refining our LLM guardrails as well. In the smaller boxes, you see our key drivers, promoting digital trust is what I mentioned before. We are continuously committed to strengthen our oversight of AI deployment, because as you can imagine right now, there is so much innovation happening around the world, so many startups. And as a global organization, it is actually quite challenging to keep up this complete oversight as to what every BU and in distant countries is doing, with whom they are cooperating, and so forth. But in order to have this oversight, we are committed to further improve this and to make the tools and the platforms that we are providing from the group perspective as compelling as possible. And also importantly, and this relates to a comment that has been made earlier, we don't think of AI governance as something that is impeding the business. We see ourselves as actually catalysts of innovation, because with good AI governance, you're driving sustainable business value. You're not in the way of business development. A final overview. What is actually the way ahead? What is our vision? Our vision is, while we are already very much engaged to refine our own platforms and tools, I think the way ahead is to move towards more and more automation. While I don't think that AI governance per se can be fully automated, because proper governance or successful governance really hinges on the details of every single use case. You have to understand the context. And this is something that machines cannot do, at least not yet, as well as human beings can. So right now, as part of our governance, this holistic assessment of each use case is still key. But machine intelligence can still help a lot. And that is why we are continuously working on connecting the dots to connect the different platforms and systems, to optimize the data, integrate the data, to automate as much as possible. For example, we are currently working on an automated reporting, an extract of information that we can provide to this new EU AI office for high-risk use cases, because we are performing the governance already in our own tools, but we have to create a template so that we can automate the reporting process, so to speak, so that this will not be a manual exercise if we have high-risk use cases. At the same time, we are working towards automating the monitoring of our group-wide AI and general operations. And with that, I would actually like to close, and I'm interested to hear whether you have questions. Thank you very much.